you'll need to do is actually insert the thread through here before you start sewing. So what I'll do is I'll pop this on. It is a regular bar attachment, the same as so many of the feet in that collection. But what I tend to do before I start is just thread, that's a horrible phrase, thread the thread through that centre portion, so that we don't have to worry about that once it's in place. So we then pop the foot into place. Now this one needs to be raised up over and above the normal amount that we would raise the foot, just so that it can get in place, and then we use the little clip at the back just to get that attached. So now we have the thread coming out the back. It's been passed through this centre portion. The needle is threaded. But before we start the sewing process, what we need to do is make sure that our stitches are set correctly. So we'll just move the camera around slightly. So we've got a stitch length that's actually down in the buttonhole length. We want a really, really short stitch, and you can, for the loops, I just use a regular zigzag stitch on the widest setting. Now that we're back with a slightly better lined up shot, I'll show you how the stitch works, and it is incredibly simple. We just pop on the sewing machine, drop the foot down. As with any stitch where we've manually changed to a zigzag and we have a particular sized opening, I always run it through manually just first to make sure that everything works smoothly and nothing gets caught up. So once you've done that process, you can then go ahead and just sew the stitches. Once you've finished, make sure that you take the needle out of the way, and because we've got this bar, I can't just drag the work forward to take it out of the machine. I have to slide it off backwards. Now I've used two different threads so that we can quite clearly see the back and the front. Now if you're using two similar coloured threads, then you won't have this blue dotting at the sides. But in this instance, it's just to show you the point that I'm going to make next, which is with a zigzag, you can't cut through this loopage. Now the loops work brilliantly using a zigzag stitch if you're going to be leaving them as loops. However, if you try to cut them, which I'll just do very quickly, there's nothing holding them in place, which means they'll just pull out. So you can't use just a plain zigzag if you intend, it just won't work. If you intend to cut them, if you want the fringe effect rather than the loop effect. They work very nicely for a loop, but what we need, if we move back across, we need either this stitch, which is a zigzag with extra stitches in, or we need this stitch, which is an overcast stitch. Both those two options have extra stitches in between the left to right motion. So it goes right to left stitch, left to right stitch. So there's a locking stitch included and incorporated into that particular setting. So we'll just move back, and now we can stitch through using this overcast stitch I'm using for this one, which will allow us to cut through it, unlike the zigzag stitch. So let's start sewing that. Now, as you may or may not be able to see, I'll hand crank this for a couple of stitches. You can see the actual locking stitch take place. So we jump across, and then we take a lock stitch. Then we jump back, and we take a lock stitch. And this is what secures everything once we cut it, so that we actually have a fringe rather than an unravelling mess. And again, we still can't just yank it forwards, we have to remove it backwards. And this is what the stitch looks like. with the lock stitch in place, the overlock. So what I'm going to do is just use my seam ripper. I'm going to try and do this vertically, not necessarily the smartest plan, and then we just cut through all of that, which gives us the first layer of fringing. If I turn that sideways, hopefully you can actually see that first level of fringing. Now what I tend to do is actually go through several times and repeat that process so that I get a denser feeling of fringe. So here's the denser effect. If we can get that in focus, there we go. This is the denser effect, and as you can see there's multiple layers of fringing that have gone in place, which gives it a much more visible look when you move that to the side. Now to see that in slightly better detail, we have the looping here, and then we have fringe work here. And this can be used as embellishment on a variety of projects. It can be for soft toys, it can be for quilting, it can be for bags, cushions, anything that